Plato. No, Plato. That's the one. Plato is the second of the big three Athenians at the foundation of Western philosophy. He was the student of Socrates and the teacher of Aristotle. He's so deeply ingrained in our culture that the word we use for studies of all kinds, academics, comes from the name of the school he founded, the Academy. His most seminal idea is his doctrine of forms. Plato thinks that every particular thing we encounter in the world, every cup, every table, every tree, everything, has a universal essence, which he calls their form. Forms are like blueprints or paradigms, and the things in the world are imperfect copies of this form. For example, take these trees. No two are alike. But despite their differences, we recognize that they have a common essence. This is because, according to Plato, they all share the form of a tree. So in other words, a form is what makes something what it is. But it's often hard to describe forms more specifically than that. Look at these trees again. Ordinarily, we would characterize them by their size, color, leaf shape, or branch structure. But none of these traits would get us to the form of a tree, because none of these traits are shared by all trees. For example, this one's too big, this one's too small, too deciduous, too coniferous, too tropical, not tropical enough, too willowy, and this one's going to leave the willows out, and so on. The point is, the sensible or physical qualities that we typically use to describe things are not as deeply rooted in particulars as is their form. It's not only tangible objects that have forms, but concepts too. Beauty, justice, and goodness have forms, for the same reason as above. Take beauty. We encounter people who are beautiful, or poems, or scenes, or songs, but the form of beauty cannot attach exclusively to any one of these, because the form of beauty is what unites them. It is beauty's simpliciter. The form of Wait. Listen. Do you hear that? Well, that was beautiful. And for Plato, it gives rise to the following question. What is it that is contained in this song that joins it not only to other beautiful songs, but to beautiful sonnets and sunsets and every other beautiful thing? Once again, this is a difficult question because what we would typically say about this song will address it in its particularity. We can name the aria, the opera, the composer, the date of publication, or the countertenor who sings it. But none of this would get us to the form of beauty, which is none of these traits, because the form of beauty is beautiful, but nothing else besides. Plato thinks this is a question of much more than just theoretical interest. To illustrate the practical importance of understanding forms, Plato gives his famous allegory of the cave. Imagine a group of people chained in a cave, facing its back wall. Don't think of them so much as literal prisoners, but shackled metaphorically by their ignorance. They've been there their whole lives. At the mouth of the cave is a fire, and in front of the fire is a wall. Behind this wall, people walk, holding statues of animals and other objects. The statues cast shadows on the wall, which the prisoners see. So, for instance, someone at the mouth of the cave walks with a statue of a horse, and the shadow of a horse moves across the wall. Supposing you're one of the prisoners, you wouldn't think to yourself, this is the shadow of a horse. You would simply think, this is a horse, since you haven't seen anything but shadows your whole life. But of course you would have no knowledge of actual horses, and whatever you knew about these shadows would have limited application to the real thing. Supposing that someone in the cave was able to free themselves and leave, they would encounter actual horses, illuminated not by the dim light of the fire but by the sun itself. But Plato cautions that it would not be easy. They would be dazzled by the daylight after spending so long in the cave, and it would take some time for their eyes to adjust. Once they did, however, realizing how little they used to know, they might pity the prisoners and return to free them. But now their eyes would be poorly acclimated to the darkness, and they would no longer be able to discern the shadows on the wall. Thus it would seem to the other prisoners that their trip to the surface had confused them. Their tales of real horses and the brilliance of the sun would seem like so many philosophers' convolutions. Plato writes that the prisoners might even kill this person if they were too insistent on leading them out of their ignorance. But when it comes to the most important forms, especially the form of the good, it is essential to strive for true understanding. Such knowledge should be the first task of philosophers and politicians, two types which we think of as quite different today, but which Plato thought should share in this common goal. In fact, he believed that philosophers should rule a city for just this reason. They would be best suited to guide the state towards a collective good because they would best understand it. Devoting 50 years to education and training, they would be freed by their wisdom from any desire to use their power for personal gain. Only then would the state have leaders dedicated to just rule, and to bringing the form of the good into as many things as possible in the world. Philosophers sometimes get a reputation for being too idealistic, and maybe some would smirk here and say that Plato's head is so high in the clouds that he's overlooked the practical realities which destine his theories to failure. A likely response, Plato would think, to someone familiar only with shadows. This has been Flash Philosophy. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And most of all, thank you for watching.